The HOA tried to steal my farm by calling it a public botanical garden. But what they didn't know, I control the power to their entire neighborhood. High voltage. You won't believe how I turn the tables, legally and brilliantly. This sets up the central conflict, teases a twist, and promises a satisfying revenge, all while leaving just enough mystery to make people stick around. Most people picture retirement as a lounge chair, a golf course, or endless cruises. Not me. I found peace in the soil. Nestled beyond the creeping arms of suburbia was my 12-acre farm. A thick tree line divided my land from the outermost edge of the Woodgrove Hills Homeowners Association, a sprawling cookie-cutter community of pastel houses and pristine lawns. My farm, however, was a canvas of purpose and personality, rows of vegetables, fruit trees, herbs, and rare flowers from my travels abroad. The winding gravel path led to my modest home, solar panels on the roof, and a wraparound porch where I spent my mornings sipping coffee. I kept to myself, and that's how I liked it. The farm thrived through routine and love. Birdsong woke me up before the sun, and by the time most of Woodgrove was walking their identical golden retrievers, I'd already watered half the lower field. That farm was more than land. It was a culmination of a life built on independence, off-grid where it counted, rain collection barrels, solar panels, backup generators, and a curious utility easement agreement that granted me access, and in one peculiar clause, partial control, over a power distribution point that predated the HOA's expansion. I rarely thought about that clause. Not until I met her. I first noticed the cars. Not a lot. Just one or two on the weekends, driving slowly along the tree line, sometimes pulling halfway into gravel lane, before reversing out. I thought nothing of it. Maybe real estate looky-loose? Or perhaps some curious birders mistaking my property for a nature preserve. But then came the woman in the sun hat. I was tending my hybrid orchids near the greenhouse when I noticed her, mid-40s, blazer over a floral dress, clipboard in hand. She stood just beyond the property line, watching, not walking, just watching. "Can I help you?" I asked, approaching with a dirt-streaked glove raised in polite caution. "Oh," just admiring the display. Her voice had that tight, sugary tone that came with too many years of forced smiles. "You keep such immaculate grounds." I assumed it was a public space, like a botanical garden. "It's private property," I said evenly. "I live and work here." She laughed too loudly. "Of course, but it's so beautiful, I'm sure people assume it's for the community." That word, community, hung in the air like a warning bell. She introduced herself as Karen Ashford, president of the Woodgrove Hills HOA. Her handshake was firm, and her eyes scanned everything behind me like she was appraising it. That should have been the end of it. But Karen didn't do endings. She did beginnings, especially of problems. 3 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Not from the county, not from utilities, but from the Woodgrove Hills HOA. "Dear Sir, or Madam, it has come to our attention that your property may fall under the definition of a public accessible green space as outlined in our community regulations. Given the volume of pedestrian admiration and its proximity to Woodgrove Hills, it is subject to aesthetic, noise, and maintenance review by the HOA board." It went on to cite vague local bylaws and proposal for a partnership that would benefit the community. At the bottom, in sharp black ink, failure to comply may result in fines or legal recourse. My laugh startled the chickens. I reread it twice, then once more to make sure it wasn't some satirical prank. No such luck. Karen had mistaken admiration for jurisdiction, and I had no intention of entertaining that fantasy. I called the number listed. A perky assistant took a message. Karen never called back. Instead, the letters escalated. First came a warning notice, then an official fine, $150 for unauthorized plant structures. I assumed they meant my trellises. When I ignored it, they sent a second notice with legal implications. At this point, I called my lawyer. Elaine was an old friend and a better adversary than I'd ever want against me. She reviewed the county land maps, the HOA boundary agreements, and utility overlays. Her conclusion was swift and cold. They don't have a damn leg to stand on. We drafted a formal cease and desist, citing property lines, easement terms, and the HOA's own charter. I sent it certified mail with a thick folder of documentation attached. Then, for good measure, I installed a motion-trigger camera at the head of the gravel lane. For a week, it was quiet, peaceful, just like before. Then came the drone. It buzzed overhead as I was planting rosemary near the north fence. It hovered for 5 solid minutes, taking pictures. I called the FAA complaint line and uploaded the footage. Later that evening, a car idled just beyond the tree line for 20 minutes. I saw the silhouette of a clipboard against the dashboard. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was surveillance. 2 more fines arrived, one for unauthorized gatherings. I assumed they meant the gardening club that met here monthly, and another for exceeding lawn maintenance noise levels, absurd since I use electric equipment. Each envelope was thicker, more aggressive. Karen was no longer suggesting partnership. She was dictating terms. She wanted access to the land. She wanted to label my space as community green infrastructure. She wanted HOA control, and all that came with it. And then, the boldest move yet. Karen scheduled a Woodgrove HOA board meeting. On the agenda, reclassification of adjacent property as Community Botanical Reserve. Attached was a proposed annexation agreement. She wanted a vote to take jurisdiction over my land. The gall was stunning, but I wasn't afraid, because what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the roots of my farm ran deeper than just soil. The power lines that ran through the edge of my acreage serviced a legacy substation, a small, archaic node left over from the days before Woodgrove Hills ever existed. It had been sold to me in a private contract by the previous landowner, a silent clause that gave me oversight of maintenance and operational access. One of the lines fed directly into a buried conduit, straight into Karen's house. And that's when I stopped getting angry and started getting ready. Karen Ashford wasn't just power-hungry. She was strategic. That became clear when I dug deeper into her past. The day after I received the reclassification of adjacent property notice, I went looking, not with shovels, but with public records. It didn't take long. Karen had recently applied for a local beautification grant tied to expanding green public spaces, a $50,000 prize awarded annually to HOAs that integrate non-HOA land into community development plans. There was just one problem. She didn't own the land. I did. That grant application was submitted 2 weeks before her first letter to me. She wasn't reacting to admiration of my flowers. She had planned this. The photos she'd submitted with her grant of my farm, my greenhouse, my irrigation ponds. Even my trellises, those unauthorized structures she fined me for, were prominently displayed as community design sustainability features. My jaw clenched tighter with every document I opened. This wasn't petty HOA meddling anymore. It was calculated exploitation. She was trying to turn my work into her victory. And if she could convince her board or enough residents that my land somehow belonged to community, she might even get away with it. That wasn't ambition. That was theft. I walked the edge of my property that afternoon, boots crunching over gravel and dry pine needles, until I reached the old gray junction box tucked into the hillside. It looked like nothing, a relic from another era, but inside was a heartbeat of an electrical puzzle that Karen didn't know she'd stepped into. Decades ago, when this land was part of a ranch, the power company had installed a private substation here, fed by a main line further east. When the rancher sold his outer parcels to developers, eventually becoming Woodgrove Hills, this particular plot, along with the junction box, remained intact and legally separate. When I purchased a farm, I inherited the land and the utility easement, confirmed and notarized. I wasn't a power company, but I was the legally designated gatekeeper of that node. Any maintenance, outages, or service changes to properties downstream, just 3 of them, including Karen's house, had to go through me for approval. For years, I left it untouched, barely remembering it existed. But now I understood the irony. While Karen thought she could control my land, she was entirely dependent on mine. I didn't need to shut off her lights yet. That would come later, if it came at all. No, first I needed to let her walk deeper into the hole she was digging, until the fall was her own doing. The letters turned into threats. Another envelope came. This time hand-delivered by a man in a blue polo with Woodgrove compliance team stitched into the chest. He didn't even make eye contact when I answered the door. Just handed me a clipboard with a printed sheet. Notice of violation. Failure to comply with community land use guidelines. Your property will be subject to board review and potential corrective action. Get off my land, I said, voice cold. He turned and left. That week, I saw 2 drones fly overhead. One in the morning, one at dusk. I caught a woman in a pink tracksuit standing just beyond my fence, taking photos with her phone. When I called out, she bolted. My mailbox was stuffed daily with flyers for HOA meetings, invitations to community cleanups with my farm as the meeting point, and leaflets claiming we're all in this together. It would have been laughable if it weren't so persistent. She was trying to create a narrative that my farm was some sort of rogue property breaking the spirit of unity. I filed complaints with the county, started a video log, recorded every drone, every footstep, every voice beyond the tree line. This wasn't just about protecting my farm anymore. It was about protecting truth from manipulation. Every day for a week, I reviewed the utility maps, legal documents, and Karen's communications. And then I began planning. Step 1, notification. I drafted a letter to the county electrical authority notifying them of planned maintenance activity on my easement-fed junction. I kept it vague, but within the letter of the law. Step 2, installation. I added a new gate to the gravel path leading to the substation, padlocked, motion censored, and posted with a sign, authorized access only, private utility easement. That alone would stir questions if anyone wandered too close. Step 3, backup preparation. I installed a temporary generator system at the substation entrance, just in case Karen got clever and tried to claim sabotage. Everything would be logged, monitored, and time-stamped. And step 4, exposure. But not yet, not directly. I needed the tension to build. I needed the HOA board to feel the pressure from within. I printed out Karen's grant application and anonymous copies of the photos, my photos attached to it. Then I mailed them to every member of the HOA board. No return address, just the word integrity written across the top. Let Karen squirm under her own lies. 3 days later, I saw the first shift. A neighbor, Peter, I think his name was, stood at the end of my gravel lane with his arms crossed. I approached cautiously. I didn't know she was doing all that, he said before I even spoke. Your place? I mean, it's beautiful, but it's yours. Always figured that was obvious. He scratched his head, looking a little embarrassed. She told us you were planning to sell. Said she was trying to help you transition the land to community use. I almost laughed. Another neighbor stopped by the next day. Then another. Not many, just a few, but the cracks were forming. I could feel Karen's story fraying. People were asking questions she couldn't answer. The photos, the drone flights, the grant, it all smelled like overreach. Word spread quietly but effectively. One HOA board member anonymously emailed me, thanking me for the documents and assuring me they would revisit the proposed annexation motion. That wasn't good enough, because Karen wasn't backing down. If anything, she was getting bolder. She scheduled a new board vote, this time with a full neighborhood meeting. Her plan was clear: rally the residents, twist the facts, and vote to authorize an inquiry into my property status. And that was her final mistake, because she scheduled the meeting for Thursday, and I had just filed a work order for routine utility maintenance to take place Thursday morning. Thursday dawned with crisp edge in the air, a breeze that carried anticipation like a scent. At exactly 7 a.m., I unlocked the gate to the substation and wheeled out the signs I'd made the night before. Warning: scheduled utility maintenance. Temporary service interruptions expected. Authorized access only warning. The workers I'd hired, a 2-man independent electrical crew, both licensed and discreet, arrived 15 minutes later. I handed them the work order I'd filed, legal and official. They didn't need to know the full story, just enough to follow protocol. We disconnected the feeder line that ran into the Woodgrove spur. Not the whole neighborhood, just a tiny strip, 3 homes. Karen's was right in the middle. By 9:10 a.m., the lights at her house were out, HVAC off, Wi-Fi dead. Security system pinging a failure code. The smart gate she boasted about? Locked open, limp without power. The outage wasn't dramatic. No smoke, no sparks, just a quiet inconvenience. But timing? That was the art. Because Karen's big meeting started at 10 a.m. And now, as she scrambled to host her neighborhood summit from a house with no air conditioning or working projector, I sat on my porch with an iced tea, watching a hawk spiral over the orchard and waited. According to the video one of the residents sent me later, the meeting began with 4 smiles and a suspicious number of battery-powered fans. Karen stood at the front of her half-lit living room, a folding table behind her, and a whiteboard that read, "Protecting Our Community, Annexation Proposal Review." But from the start, things spiraled. "Why are the lights out?" someone asked. "Did we not pay our bills?" Karen brushed it off. Routine grid issues. But her face tightened when someone mentioned it had only affected her side of the street. That's when the second voice piped up. "Why were there construction signs at the end of your driveway this morning?" Karen's smile faltered. Then someone else, a board member, stood and held up a manila envelope. "I want to talk about these documents that were anonymously mailed to us. Photos, grant forms, signatures, all showing this annexation was in motion months ago, without board approval." Voices rose. Accusations floated. A woman pointed out that the photos used in the grant were taken from drones, possibly violating privacy laws. Another board member admitted he'd visited my farm and saw nothing unsafe or out of compliance. In fact, he said, "It looks like a model of sustainability. Why are we targeting him?" Karen tried to regain control, but her voice cracked. Sweat gathered at her temples. No AC to cool her down. And then came the final blow. One of the residents read aloud from the grant website. "Applicants found falsifying land access or public use documentation will be disqualified and may face penalties." The room fell silent. Karen's carefully stacked house of cards began to tremble. By Friday morning, the emails had started. Neighbors who once ignored my existence now sent messages with subject lines like, "So sorry, I had no idea," and "Karen's gone too far." 2 residents stopped me by the gravel road. This time not to glare or gossip, but to shake my hand. One offered to help install security, lighting at my gate. The other handed me a fresh peach pie. I declined the pie, accepted the help. Then the local paper called. Apparently, someone had tipped them off. Maybe a board member, maybe a resident with a guilty conscience. But now, a reporter wanted to know the story behind the Botanical Garden feud. I agreed, off the record, for now, just enough to let them know the HOA's actions weren't neighborly oversight. They were harassment, enabled by someone with a personal agenda and something to gain. On social media, the conversation exploded in the local community pages. Screenshots of Karen's grant photos appeared alongside real-time accounts of the power outage. One comment simply read, "You tried to steal a man's farm. You lost power instead." Classic. People began demanding Karen's resignation from the board. Others called for a full audit of HOA spending. My farm hadn't just become a battleground. It had become a rallying point. And Karen? She was vanishing into her own shadow. Karen didn't show her face for 3 days. According to Chatter, she'd been fielding calls from the grant office, which had launched a formal investigation into her application. Apparently, a whistleblower, bless their sneaky soul, had forwarded the county official a full copy of the annexation proposal, signed without landowner consent. The fallout was immediate. The grant committee suspended her application. The HOA board called an emergency session without her. And by Monday morning, residents were circulating a petition to dissolve the current board leadership entirely. But Karen wasn't done yet. On Tuesday, she drove up to my gate. No clipboard, no blazer, just sunglasses and a tight-lipped expression. She stood behind the lock bars and called out, "We need to talk." I stepped forward, slowly, calm. "We've said all we need to," I replied. She gripped the bars like they might yield. "Look, this got out of hand, but we're neighbors. We should find common ground." I raised an eyebrow. "After you tried to claim my land? Use my photos? Send drones over my fields. She looked away. I was trying to improve the community. I stepped closer, voice low. You try to control what didn't belong to you. But now that people know the truth, you've lost control. And I suggest you stop digging. Because the next line I cross won't be metaphorical. It'll be legal. She turned, got in her car, and drove off. I never saw her near my property again. The fallout continued in waves. Karen officially resigned 2 weeks later, citing health concerns and increased personal obligations. The board dissolved shortly after, replaced by a temporary council appointed with oversight from a county mediator. The grant office sent me a letter thanking me for my documentation. They confirmed Karen had been disqualified and banned from applying in future cycles. And the community? They changed. More neighbors came to visit, not to interfere, but to learn. Gardeners asked about my drip irrigation system. Retirees dropped off compost. A science teacher from the local school brought her students to tour the greenhouse. With my permission, I wasn't the weird farmer anymore. I was the guy who stood his ground. And the farm, it flourished. The herbs grew fuller. The bees returned. The fruit trees bent heavy with promise. But best of all, peace returned, not as a reward, but as a reclaimed right. My land, my life, my terms. And as for the junction box and its quiet little node, I left it locked, protected, and humming quietly in the hillside, because power, real power, doesn't shout. It waits, and it listens. The county investigation wrapped up faster than anyone expected. I received a formal statement 2 weeks after Karen's resignation. It confirmed what everyone already suspected: misuse of grant documents, unauthorized annexation plans, falsified public use claims, and ethical violations on behalf of the HOA leadership. The findings were damning, but it didn't end there. The grant committee launched their own internal review of HOA applications for the past 5 years. Karen's case had set off red flags: similar language, questionable photos, and a pattern of land grabs disguised as beautification efforts. 2 other HOAs across the county were placed under review as a result. Woodgrove Hills became a cautionary tale. The story hit the local paper's front page under the headline: "The garden they tried to steal. How one man beat his HOA at their own game." The story featured photos of my orchard greenhouse and a shot of the substation gate, with the sign visible: "Private utility easement. Do not enter." The article went viral locally. But more importantly, it sent a message: HOAs weren't untouchable. And sometimes the quietest voice could shake the loudest walls. A few days after the article ran, my mailbox overflowed. Thank you notes from neighbors. A handwritten letter from a retired city planner, praising my tactful resistance. Even a gift card from the local hardware store with a note: "For the man who knows how to build boundaries, literally and metaphorically." I laughed at that one. But the real surprise came the following weekend. A county supervisor asked me to speak at a town hall forum on landowner rights. They'd received so many requests for clarification about easements, zoning abuses, and HOA overreach. They wanted someone with real experience to talk to people. I hesitated. I wasn't a public speaker. I was a farmer. But then I remembered the cold way Karen had looked through the fence. The entitlement. The assumption that power, once claimed, would never be challenged. So I said yes. The room was packed, more than 100 people. Some wore HOA pins. Others looked like me, quiet landowners with dirt under their nails and suspicion in their eyes. I spoke plainly, told them what had happened, step by step, showed them copies of the letters, the maps, even the video footage of Karen's failed meeting. And when I explained how the easement worked, the legal reality of owning the node that powered someone else's house, the room laughed out loud. They weren't laughing at me. They were laughing with relief, with understanding, with vindication. That was the day I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a movement. Karen tried to keep a low profile after everything fell apart, but justice has a way of catching up. The HOA board's internal review showed she'd used association funds for more than just drones and mailers. Personal expenses had been hidden under community engagement, catering receipts, gift baskets, even a down payment on a backyard hot tub labeled as a wellness feature. The residents voted to pursue restitution. She was served papers within a month. I wasn't in the courtroom when she faced the consequences, but I followed the case. The HOA demanded repayment of funds, plus damages for reputational harm. The county fined her for grant fraud, and her real estate license, it turned out, had quietly expired and not been renewed, likely because she knew what was coming. Word around the neighborhood was that she sold her house under a pseudonym and moved out of state. A fresh start, someone said. But for me, it wasn't about vengeance. It was about balance being restored. The soil of justice might be slow to turn, but when it does, the weeds don't stand a chance. Spring arrived early the next year. The peach trees bloomed in synchronized blushing pink, and the bees returned in droves, no longer driven off by the buzzing of surveillance drones. But something else had changed too. The new HOA, reformed and humbled, began reaching out to residents for ideas, not orders. The new president, a soft-spoken woman named Eva, stopped by with a potted herb basket and a simple message. "We're here to listen now." I nodded, wary but willing. They removed the annexation initiative from their records, canceled all pending compliance complaints, and most importantly, they started a voluntary community gardening program based entirely on collaboration. No forced inspections, no drones, just neighbors helping neighbors. Some of them asked if I'd lead a workshop on irrigation. I said I'd think about it. More importantly, people had learned where the line was and how dangerous it was to cross it. I walked through my field that evening, dusk bleeding orange across the soil. The trellises stood firm, the greenhouse humming quietly. My domain, my space, no longer threatened. Respect had taken root, not from dominance, but from truth. There's a kind of silence that only comes after a storm, not the silence of fear, but of fulfillment. I found it again that summer. Standing by the junction box one morning, coffee in hand, I thought about how power had changed forms throughout this fight. Karen thought she had it because of her title. The HOA thought they had it because of their rules. But real power? It wasn't in threats or letters or board votes. It was in knowing the land, understanding its rights, protecting it with patience, precision, and proof. It was in the stillness of early morning, when the orchard breathed quietly and the gate stood locked, not to exclude but to define. My land was never public. It was never a botanical garden. It was a sanctuary, one I built with my hands, defended with my mind, and preserved with my resolve. And now, it stood untouched, unclaimed, unbroken. The lesson was clear. You can plant lies. You can spread control like creeping vines. But eventually, truth finds the sun. And when it does, it grows back stronger.